Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter has smashed every record in history. As of the time of filming, over 118,000 backers have pledged more than $27.5 million towards his campaign in just 10 days. If you counted Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter as one of the last 100 IPOs that happened on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, he would be at number 77 on that list. That's insane, which brings up the question of where is all this money going? Hey, it's Deborah with another video on the business side of publishing. It's surprisingly difficult for an author to get intel on how comparable titles and authors are doing, so Kickstarter is just a treasure trove of information. As I explained in my last video, Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter has two components: a subscription swag box and a straight up long pre-order for 4 new novels. For the first time ever, we have got some hard numbers for a book launch by a genre-defining New York Times best-selling author, and I cannot wait to dig in. The first question is, just how high is this Kickstarter going to go? 2 weeks ago, Andrew Meredith asked if I wanted in on a betting pool on this question, and of course I said yes, but I wasn't just going to throw out a random guess, because we don't do that on this channel. I started by looking at some fundamentals. The main driver of pledge activity has really been the strength of Sanderson's author platform. So I had to look around different places to see how many fans he had there and what kind of engagement he was getting. Now, these fans who follow Sanderson on these various different platforms are probably going to be his most engaged readers, and therefore the people who are most likely going to back his Kickstarter. Looking at this range of numbers, it gave me a fairly good feel for whereabouts the total number of backers was going to end up. So I picked 150,000. As I was putting my spreadsheet together, I also started looking at how the average pledge per backer was changing over time and the volume of pledges coming in per hour, because that was going to give me a really good indication of what the momentum for the Kickstarter was like. After that, I started looking at other comparable Kickstarter campaigns just to try and place where his campaign was sitting into a wider context. And that gave me a good ballpark in terms of where we can expect the average pledge per backer for his current Kickstarter campaign to end up. I could have stopped there, but it's a little bit too high level and I didn't feel confident about getting a reasonable amount of accuracy in the prediction. So I went one level down. I had my spreadsheet calculate what the total pledge value would be if I had 150,000 backers who were pledging across the different tiers in the same proportions. That got me to $31.7 million in total, with an average pledge size of about $211, well within the ballpark and a little bit below what the Way of Kings leatherbound Kickstarter achieved, which makes total sense because that was a special anniversary edition. I only realized my mistake afterwards. You see, when you multiply out the total number of backers for a given tier and the pledge value of that reward, and you do it across all the tiers and add that up and then compare that total to what the total pledged value is, you end up a couple of $1 million short, and that is the value of shipping. Shipping actually makes up a huge part of this Kickstarter, so strictly speaking, I should have added like another 6 or 7 million on top of my 31.7 estimate. That would have gotten me to something like $38.5 million with an average pledge of about $257, which just feels wrong, even though it is technically correct if I was strictly following my method. And the reason for that is because Kickstarter behavior over the length of a campaign changes. The most enthusiastic fans always jump in and back the project first, which means the pledges in the early part of the campaign is always skewed towards the higher value tiers. If we have a look at how the distribution of pledges has changed over the first 10 or 11 days of the campaign, you can see a clear trend where new backers are opting for the tiers where it's ebook only, audiobook only, or no swag options, as opposed to the early backers. If you look at pledge activity over the life of a Kickstarter campaign, you'll find that most of the funds have already come in by the end of the 10th day. There's hardly any pledges in terms of dollar value coming through on days 11 through to 25, and a slight uplift at the end with the push to finish off the campaign, perhaps some stretch rewards, things like that. If I correct for shipping and use the updated distribution of pledges from day 10 as opposed to day 1, I end up with a guess which is not too far off my original guess. There are a lot of variables and it really depends on how those last 5 days in the campaign goes. If the pledge distributions continue to shift more towards ebooks, which would be a trend towards what Sanderson's normal sales mix looks like, 31.7 million may not be too far off the final total. At least that's what I'm hoping. Right now, there's only 3 of us left in the betting pool, and we are all pretty close to each other, so I've got my fingers crossed. I'm going to be doing a countdown live stream for the end of this Kickstarter because I'm so excited to see what happens. If you want to join me, make sure you head on over to my channel page and click set reminder so you can get a notification when I go live. So that's my guess for how much money Brandon Sanderson can generate in total from Kickstarter. The next question, of course, is what is he going to do with all this money? Unfortunately, this isn't going to be as comprehensive of an analysis as I would like, simply because we have zero information about what is in these swag boxes. I've got no way of working out how many of the backers for swag and for hardcovers are going to need international shipping versus not. Since the difference between international shipping and domestic shipping is quite substantial, any variables to do with shipping hardcovers and shipping swag boxes are going to be pretty sensitive to changes in assumptions. We've really got no way of building a reasonably accurate model for the swag and the hardcover components, so I'm just going to exclude those from my analysis. On the bright side, it does mean that the following analysis is a whole lot more relatable to most indie authors since we're just looking at a straight up book launch. But of course, Sanderson has to be extra and do 4 book launches instead of just 1. I don't have access to Dragonsteel Entertainment's books and records, but I don't think we need that in order to make a pretty reasonable guess at what the title P&L looks like for these secret projects. Even though technically a lot of these costs should be shared out across all of the different formats, I am going to group most of them under the ebook. Whether you like it or not, the ebook has now become the default format over the hardback. It also makes more sense from a workflow perspective because these days you normally do the ebook first and then you go on to think about the paperback and the hardcover and also doing the audiobook. In terms of finalizing his manuscript, Brandon Sanderson likes to do 5 passes and he also uses all of these different types of editing services. So I would put that at around $15,000. Sanderson also likes to have art in his books and he typically has more of it compared to your average author. And so I've made additional allowances here for interior art as well as really high-end cover art. That's roughly another 10 grand on top. The other costs are pretty incidental. All in all, I think each secret project ebook is going to cost him about $25,000 to produce. If you're freaking out just looking at these numbers, don't panic. I have used the higher end of the rates that are quoted out there for these parts of the book production process because it's Brandon Sanderson and he just goes all out. You don't have to spend anywhere near this much to still end up with a quality self-published book. It's $10 per ebook or $9 after taking out Kickstarter's cut, which means he has to sell at least 2,712 ebooks in order to break even on that upfront cost. At the time of filming, he has already sold more than 30,000 ebooks if you're just counting the 2 ebook tiers. And the beauty of digital formats is once you recoup that upfront initial cost, every single additional sale is just pure profit straight to your bottom line. That is going to be approximately $245,000 per secret project ebook that goes straight into the Dragonsteel bank account. Or if you want to put it another way, ebooks alone are contributing about $1 million in pure profit. That's pretty eye-opening on its own, but the audiobooks are even more profitable at roughly 100,000 words long. That's about 10 hours of audiobook narration. The minimum union rate is about $250 per finished hour. And again, because this is Sanderson, let's assume he's going to be using more well-known, more experienced narrators who can charge more than that. Let's say double. When you look at the additional upfront investment required to produce an audiobook, it's only in the ballpark of about $5,000. At $15 per audiobook, which is about $13.60 after you take out Kickstarter fees, Sanderson only needs to sell 379 audiobooks before he breaks even. And right now, over 28,000 people have backed the audiobook only tiers. That's another $380,000 per secret project audiobook going straight into the Dragonsteel coffers, or $1.5 million in total. That's right, as of right now, Brandon Sanderson has generated more than $2.5 million of pure profit just from the ebook and audiobook tiers alone. If we use my updated estimates, we're really looking at more like $3.3 million by the time the campaign's over. That is a big number for a self-published book release. A lot of people are pointing to the scale of his success and saying, well, look, he's a big name author. He's only pulling these numbers because of how famous he is and he doesn't need the money anyway, so he shouldn't be using Kickstarter. I totally don't get this argument at all. First off, he's charging a fair retail price for his books. His fans are not paying any more than they otherwise would if these books had just been released normally through a traditional publisher. Secondly, he's also paying everybody involved in the production process a fair market wage for what they're contributing. But fine, let's look at what happens if Sanderson doesn't use Kickstarter and instead goes with the standard indie setup of KDP plus ACX, or just goes through a traditional publisher who offers a 25% royalty on ebooks and audiobooks. The difference is immediately apparent when you just look at how much gets skimmed off the top for distribution. Kickstarter for US creators only takes 8%. Amazon takes 30% plus delivery fees. ACX is even worse. Looking at their help page, you would think that royalties are calculated off of the retail price, but it's actually not. It's calculated on net sales receipts. And according to this article from the Alliance of Independent Authors, it works out to be way less. If you run those numbers, that actually works out to be slightly worse than just going with a traditional publisher giving 25% royalties. That is a lot of money going to big corporations who act as middlemen instead of going to the author who creates the value by writing the books that readers love to read. So, I mean, granted, the Kickstarter column here in this spreadsheet does not include the overhead costs of running Dragonsteel books, whereas the royalty rates that would be set by KDP, ACX, and traditional publishing companies would take their overhead costs into account when they set those rates. But still, for all the people who are arguing that Brandon Sanderson should not be using a Kickstarter because he's too big, you are arguing for readers to be paying more money to big corporations like Amazon and traditional publishers? Or are you afraid that because traditional publishers are not going to see any share of these profits, they're going to have less money to go around in paying out advances to other authors, which means they're going to take less chances on titles, which means less diversity in the kinds of authors and titles that get published, when really all of those authors and titles would probably be profitable on their own if the traditional publishing company didn't insist on sticking to an outdated business model. There's also a few interesting things that come out of looking more closely into the tiers. Total amount of money raised by the two tiers that had hardcovers was about 40% of the total Kickstarter funds pledged at that point in time. That's enough demand there that I can't think of a single reason why you wouldn't always set up a print-on-demand version of your books, even if you're primarily focused on selling ebooks or audiobooks as it may be. Obviously, you wouldn't get the best margins because print on demand is much more expensive on a per unit basis compared to offset printing, even after you factor in the headaches of warehousing and fulfillment and all that stuff for offset printing. But if there are people out there willing to buy print formats, it doesn't cost all that much to set up a paperback and hardcover that's print on demand for a published ebook title. And so you should just do it because there's no reason to leave money sitting on the table. The data on swag was not all that surprising. It pretty much is in line with all your expectations that only the hardcore fans would go for the swag, and they also have a tendency to prefer hardcovers. What is interesting though is you can use the number of backers who have opted for swag as an approximate measurement of how engaged the fan base is. And in Sanderson's case, nearly 3 in 10 fans opted for some sort of swag in the first 4 hours that this Kickstarter was live. Even after 10 days, 2 in 10 backers are still going for swag, and that's just pretty impressive. That's just how amazing Sanderson is at building a relationship with his readers. Of course, the question of how to actually measure the size of a fan base is a little bit hard, since whenever people talk about total copies sold, that's across all formats, all titles, all translations, and everything. If I kind of work through those numbers of how that 22 million divvies up between all of his different titles, we can figure out that about half probably come from Stormlight and Mistborn sales, with the other half split between all of his other titles. Probably works out to about 400 to 500,000 copies per title, which if we step back and go with the normal assumption that typically the majority of a book's sales occur within the first year of release, as well as this little tidbit that Brandon Sanderson himself dropped about what his release weeks look like, suddenly, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about my estimate of 150,000 backers for the Kickstarter in total. If you found that interesting, please like this video so I know to do more content like this for you. And if you'd like to know more about title P&Ls and how to come up with one of your own, then you should check out this video next.